Hey guys, it's Nichole Eaton with the Rock Your Soul book and podcast, where we talk about how to hack your mindset, grow your intuition, and live your best life. You can support this podcast by subscribing, leaving a positive review, and screenshot and sharing on social media.
Okay, so welcome, Laura.
Thank you so much for listening to the Rock Your Soul book and podcast. Take a moment to book a one-on-one session with me or purchase my trainings at NicholeEaton.com. Join the Rock Your Soul Facebook group or follow me on Instagram at NicholeEaton.xo. And if you loved this podcast, don't forget to share it. Thank you.
Okay, so welcome, Laura. I'm so excited to have you on today.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
We actually were trying to connect last maybe December, and it was so crazy time for me. So I'm grateful that we finally got you on, and I also believe fiercely in divine timing. So I believe that whatever in this moment in time is meant to be revealed to our audience today, that it will be and it is. And so I'm excited to chat with you. Can you tell people a little bit about what you do?
Yes, absolutely. So I've been a therapist in New York for about 20 years, and I switched over from traditional therapy entirely to Akashic healing in December 2020. I had started to merge and kind of combine these two businesses for a couple years. And then it just got to the point where I just believe so fully and wholeheartedly in the spiritual path. And I found that all of the tools and techniques that I was offering or guided to offer my clients were all spiritual tools and all healing tools. And so it became very clear that I am an Akashic healer entirely. And so
Yes.
I'm really excited about that because it's just, I've truly found that through being a therapist for so long and also just struggling with my own health issues and learning a lot just about the physical body and healing, that using the Akashic records and the spiritual path is the most potent and efficient and effective path to healing. So I'm here to share that with as many people who will listen.
I'm obsessed with this because this is a lot. This is extremely similar to my journey. I don't know if you know this, but I was a therapist for a while in New York.
Oh my gosh,
And
that's so
yes,
funny.
and I think there's something interesting that happens working one on one with people, because what I would say to you is I was not a spiritual person prior to getting into therapy.
Mm.
And working with people and being so in sync with them and so in tune with them and so personal and intimate and honest and open and raw with them makes you believe in something that you didn't before. And I'm curious what
Mhm.
your experience, like, where did you go from being a traditional therapist or maybe training in a traditional path to opening up these doors to spirituality?
So I've always been spiritual. In fact, it's funny because my original plan was to go to the seminary and become a minister. And my stepdad told me that I cursed too much for that.
Ah, same.
So actually modern spirituality fits me quite well because I can still curse. But yeah, so that's what I was going to do. But I had met my husband in college. And so we had been together for almost 4 years at that point. And we realized that if I had gone to the seminary in Pittsburgh, which is where I grew up, um, and he was doing what he was doing, our schedules would be opposite and we would never see each other. And that relationship was too important to both of us. And for me, I really had other things that I knew I wanted to try first, like advertising and things like that industry was something that was always on my mind. And therapy was another one that had always been my dream since I was 12, but I kind of wanted to rule out these other options before I totally picked a path. And so I ended up not going to the seminary,
Right, right.
but following through with this path. And I loved advertising. It was super fun. And I'm glad that I did it because I was able to kind of rule it out for myself, although it was awesome at the time, like it wasn't for me long term. And then I got into the therapy world and I didn't incorporate spirituality into it for a long time. And I really had this ebb and flow relationship with my spirituality. It would kind of be this up and down flow. And so I never really brought it into my practice. But for me, it was when I got sick with sepsis about 5 years ago. And even prior to that, my mom had cancer, my dad had cancer, then my dad passed. And so in those processes, my spirituality kind of reared its head again. And I was able to really cultivate it in a way that was mine and didn't feel, because I had been really involved in a lot of like Christian organizations in college and things like that. And they just didn't fully resonate with me. Like I loved them, but they were also, it felt kind of pushy and like I was being fit into a box. And
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And so I
Mhm.
think that's why I had this ebb and flow with my spirituality for so long, because I couldn't figure out like what it was called or like how to put my finger on what I fully believed, you know? And so then when I found this path, I was like, oh my gosh, like, the skies opened up and rained down upon me. And I was like, this is it. This is so rocking my soul.
I love that, and I think it's interesting that you were talking about I have a lot of clients who come to me and say, "I believe in something, but it isn't that or that cookie cutter type setup. There are things that are missing or things that do not fully align with me." And so I love when people start to ask themselves those questions of like, what does make sense to me? What do I believe in, instead of what are other people asking me to believe in or telling me to believe in, or the structure of what I need to believe in, what I do to be a believer. Like I
Right.
love that process of undoing just a little, because I think you can still identify in a religious way if it makes sense to you. But I think
Hmm.
asking those questions of like, does this align with my person? Does
Hmm.
this make the most sense to me? And I think that's an important question to ask yourself, because when you start doing anything out of alignment with you, if you start doing a job that feels bad at the core, you're dating a person and it starts to feel bad. I think if you're like paying attention to yourself and giving yourself the process of like learning how to stay in alignment and learning, and when I say alignment, a lot of people don't know quite exactly what that means, but what I'm saying is finding things that feel good to you 100% of the way, that there's not a
Hmm.
resistance like, oof, I don't know, something's not quite right, because our soul really knows. So staying in alignment by feeling into yourself of what you know, I think that's so important, and especially when it comes to spirituality.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up too, because it's so cool to watch clients of mine that, I would see for years and they'd be in this really depressed space, and for somehow along the way I became this resident expert in like teenage females who self-injure, right?
Yes,
So
yep.
so many of these females would come to me and they would say, "No, like I don't believe in anything. I'm an atheist." And
Yep.
it's so cool to see how they like grow from that, because like you just said, like you tune into your being, and yes, you tune into your soul as well, but when you have like all that mud on the screen, it can be hard to find that core piece of you unless you have guidance, right? And so, or somebody like a safe holding container to be able to do so. And so it's funny because as these people were in this safe holding container in therapy for a period of time, and they start to soften a bit and they start to realize like, oh wait, and it's so cool to see some of them now like speaking very openly about their beliefs. And I'm like, oh, it's so cool just to see how that expands once you clear the mud.
Absolutely. And I've watched, obviously within therapy, it's funny, I worked with a lot of teenage girls. That was kind of my
Hmm.
wheelhouse when I first started, for sure too. Um, but I love watching people learn who they are through that process. And I love watching, I always, like I said, before getting into therapy, I didn't believe in anything. I probably would have called myself an atheist, which is so funny because most of what I do is spiritual now. Um,
Right.
but it was very, I had bad associations with religion in my lifetime, and so I had a lot of negative um correlations and connections that fueled those beliefs about religion. And what I realized was that when I was doing therapy, and especially for people who were like super in their head, finding something else, finding something bigger than what is in their head and in their body, just helped them move out of that space. And I still,
Yeah.
and once I realized that third piece, that soul piece, that bigger idea that there's more out there, that was like the game changer for people. I was watching people heal that had been coming to me for 3-4 years in 6 months after starting to
Yes.
incorporate spiritual work. So I absolutely saw the benefit of making it a holistic mind, body, spirit approach as well, because you can't just tackle thoughts, because sometimes thoughts are irrational and sometimes you're like, dude, I've been working on these thoughts forever. But when you start incorporating energy, it's like the thoughts can finally move and breathe.
Yes, and it gets to a level of depth that, like, you know, I have not found in the therapy or medical world. It really gets to a level
Absolutely.
of depth because I went to therapy on and off my whole life. And, I healed more since finding this spiritual path than I ever did in therapy. And it was great. And it provided a supportive container for me for sure. But it didn't get to the level of like long lasting healing. It would just be these repeated, like you said, almost like a band-aid approach, right? Like, yeah, you can change the thoughts, but it's like surface level. And so it is one layer, but it's a great layer, but it's only one layer as therapy. And that's why too, like for me, I noticed the same thing, Nichole, which is so cool that like clients that I had seen for a long, long time, and we'd really thought outside of the box and tried different modalities and approaches and programs and all of that. When we started incorporating the spirituality, they just started to wake up and they started to find themselves and have these realizations and heal so much faster. And I was just like, all right, enough. Like I just need to go this path. Because honestly, like I stopped believing in the diagnostics of mental health, of the mental health world. Like I
Yeah.
just stopped believing in that. And it got to the point where I was just like, I can't do this any longer because it's not authentic anymore. Like I'd be sitting with clients and I'd be like, every single thing that I want to say to you is entirely a spiritual tool or
Right.
suggestion. And so, it's just, I realized that I wanted to align with my truth as well and show up fully and authentically. And I wasn't doing that entirely for my clients when I didn't really believe in the mental health approach as much as I used to.
And I think I noticed as well in that same regard is when you're focusing on the problem grows. And when we're saying you're anxious, what are we gonna do with your anxiety? What are we gonna do with your depression? What are we gonna do about like and there's so much focus and so much energy poured into the problem rather than the healing.
Yep.
It really allows people to start to believe that they're broken, that they're anxious, that they're depressed, and their identity becomes totally entwined in that. And so moving forward, so where did this switch come from? So one of the things that you said when you first started is ancestral healing of chronic patterns, and I am obsessed with that. So I'm curious about like where you started getting your feet wet with spirituality from being kind of a mental health provider.
So I started with dabbling in Reiki. And so I got Reiki attuned, and I definitely felt some significant shifts just in my own field and my own physical body when I got attuned to Reiki. And I started noticing some shifts in my loved ones and my clients as well. And so I was like, all right, there's something to this energy stuff, right? And so then I had a consistent meditation practice. And then I started working with affirmations and chanting and the emotion code. And I just loved it all. It was so wonderful. And then I found the Akashic Records, and I was very skeptical, and I didn't really get much at first when I would go into the Akashic Records, but I noticed that when I was in that space, I was still recovering from sepsis at the time, and I wouldn't have any symptoms, I wouldn't have any pain, and then as soon as I would close the records, I would feel super energized. And I was like, this is fascinating. I wasn't really understanding what it was about, but I could see the results. Like I saw the results before I really understood what was going on, you know?
Yeah.
And so I just like kept entering that space and just tried to remain consistent in learning how to use the space. And then I started my certification program against my logic. I was just like, this doesn't make any logical sense. I kept resisting it,
Yeah.
but I just kept getting called to it. And that's what I tell people, like, you don't find this path, it finds you. And it's just a matter of listening to the calling. And so I did, and I did the certification program. And, when I sink into ancestral healing, it is just the yummiest vibe. Like I can literally feel every cell in my body vibrating when I'm doing ancestral healing. And I've just found that, like, as you identify the origin and the core of what's coming forward and your repeated chronic symptoms, you are going to have answers that are either rooted in a past life or in your ancestry. And the vast majority of the time, I found that it's in ancestry. And so then when we do that, we get to clear all the way backwards through generations before us, ones we've never even met, and then generations forward. And so, what better way to activate that ripple effect of energy work and raising the vibration of the planet than to say, all right, let's take an issue and trace it back into your ancestry. And then we're clearing so many souls and so many beings and so much energy in one shot.
It's just one of the most powerful modalities, and I just think back to a conversation I had with Kara Melendi about Akashic Records, and I think even just the idea of being able to go back, rewrite some of the energy, rewrite some of the beliefs, and allow that to expand backwards and forwards in time is so freaking cool.
Yeah.
For people who are new to this whole idea, I know, like I said, I touched a little bit on this with Kara, but what if you had to explain Akashic Records to somebody?
Mhm.
How would you describe that?
So I would describe them as a spiritual library in the clouds. So I'm a very visual person. So I picture this like library up there in the clouds, and it's being housed and protected and manned by angels, loved ones, guides, ascended masters. And ascended masters are like Jesus and Buddha. And when you open up your own record, it's like taking the book of you off of the shelf. And when you open it up, it has all of the information about your soul from the time that it first sparked into existence through past lives, through current life, and through to future lives. So I call it Google for the soul because you can basically ask any question you would type into Google about your experience, and you can ask the Akashic Records and they will have an answer for you. And so it's this beautiful, empowering way to intimately get to know really the reason that you're here on this planet, not what your ego's agenda is, and to get this information that's unique to your specific path, regardless of what situation or experience you're going through. So that's what I love so much about it is like, as opposed to the therapy world, right? Is it's so empowering to teach people how to do this themselves.
So cool. So one of the things that you also said was repeated chronic symptoms.
Yeah.
How can people like recognize what repeated chronic symptoms they have in their own lives? Like, what do you see when you're working with people that comes up over and over again for your clients?
Sure. Yeah. So chronic is really defined. If you're an adult, it's defined as 2 years or more. If you're an adolescent, it's 1 year or more. Of the same symptom just continuing to come back. So this is that thing that you've like worked on either in your own journaling or your own therapy or reading a million books, and you're just like hitting your head against a wall because you keep trying to heal, say, your anxiety, chronic panic attacks, chronic pain, chronic physical issues, whether it's stomach issues, heartburn, anything that's coming up so repeatedly, and no matter what you do to try to get rid of it, it just will not go away, right? That's a chronic pattern. Because that's where my heart goes out to people who are busting their butts to try to find a solution and heal themselves, and they just keep coming up with like, oh, keeps coming back, oh, and they get so frustrated and then they blame themselves, and that's where like the self-doubt and the self-deprecation comes in, which is also a huge chronic pattern, by the way.
Yeah.
In a lot of people, self-doubt's one of the biggest ones. And then they get stuck and they feel defeated, and I can't move forward, or I don't know where to go, or I can't envision next steps. And so that's where, this kind of work comes in and says, there's a solution to literally everything. And the solution lies within the problem, And so we have the opportunity to extract that for not the same answer that you're going to get, or that I'm going to get, or that next door neighbor is going to get, for you specifically, and what this message is meant for. Why this is coming up in your world and why this is reflecting to you.
I love that you're giving people real tools to say, okay, if it's been 1 to 2 years, if it's been, if this is a thing that's occurring daily. I love that, because I think one of the biggest issues in people moving forward as their life is unawareness. and
Mhm.
not being able to say, oh, I think a lot of people have anxiety but don't feel like, oh, it's bad enough to actually do anything about, or, oh, just everybody has anxiety, or like, oh, I don't want to go talk to somebody about my, I think there's a lot of blocks that keep people from moving forward and healing. Uh, and I think that basic one is inability to recognize that it's a real concern and that you could be living a healthier, easier life.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up too, because that was one of the things that I just kept saying over and over again in my life. I was like, whatever, I'm just an anxious person. Like, I'm always going to be an anxious person. And honestly, I was very happy, very stable, very grounded, very good. I just had anxiety, and I was like, whatever, I'm just going to have this for, like, it's just who I am. It's like part of my DNA, right?
Right, right.
And so I had just accepted it. Like, I was totally cool with it. But then when I found the Akashic Records and I was doing this work, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't actually have to, like, that's a story. I do not have to be an anxious person. Like, I don't have to stay stuck in this. I'm not just going to be an anxious person. Like, there is something that exists that is so much more phenomenal that I didn't even know existed, a level of freedom and happiness that I just didn't even know was there, to be honest, until I started to experience it. And I was like, oh my gosh, thank goodness I got sepsis, man, because I was really happy and like stable and satisfied and super successful in my career. And so I didn't have any reasons to choose to do it differently, you know? But then when I had the opportunity to and really, really think far outside the box and go way outside my comfort zone, I was like, oh, wow, there is an entirely different world out here. Just totally opened my eyes.
I find that people tend to get very sick and then have either an awakening or just like a different perspective on life. And I always feel like that's like the universe's way of slowing you down to make you think and make you create awareness about how you're living your life
Yep.
by scaring you a little, right? Of and so sometimes people will come to me for sessions and I'll be like, okay, I'm going to tell you this very clearly. Either you slow down or the universe is going to slow you down.
Yep.
And I think that that's such an interesting gateway to spirituality, is when the universe is forcing you to get real with yourself and get honest with yourself and ask yourself those questions of like, is this cool if I go out this way? Like, am I content with
Mhm.
how I've been living? Am I content with being an anxious person? I know for me, I dealt with really bad depression. I've talked about this on probably half my podcast episodes, but I dealt with really bad depression prior to connecting with spirituality. And what I really realized, and I think a lot of anxiety and a lot of depression really stems from feeling everything
Yeah.
and being such an empath and being such a feeler that I was taking on the energy of everything without having an outlet for it to leave my person, and it was weighing me down. And
Yeah.
even when I became a mom, I think I became even more intuitive, and that was just cracking it open for even more information and energy and things to come my way. And so I love that sometimes those moments that we underestimate, those life-changing moments in our life, actually change our spirituality and give us access to make different choices to live more free later on. So I know I'm just
Mhm.
wanting to say to whoever is listening and whoever this is meant for, that like right now may be really challenging for you, but it might be also the biggest gift you might receive from the universe to help you step into the next version of yourself.
Oh, entirely. Well, and it's so funny because after I got sepsis, I remember somebody saying to me like, "Have you thought about the spiritual significance of all this?" And I wanted to be like, "No."
I have sepsis. What do you mean?
Right, exactly. I was like, "Stop it." Like, I
Rude.
was so exactly. I was like so irritated. And then I was like, "Oh, wait. I think they're right." And it's so funny, like I say all the time, like everything was going swimmingly, at least as I thought. But under the surface, see, that's when we get to know the energy. Like, we don't see and understand all the time what is going on under the surface at that like molecular, even smaller than that level within us. And so the universe highlights that for us, right? And if we don't listen, yes, they continue to just bring us stronger and stronger messages. And one of the best ways that we listen is through our physical bodies, you know?
Yeah.
And when our physical body's in pain, we attend to it. We're not going to ignore that. It's hard for us to ignore that. And so we pay attention to it. And so they know, like the universe knows that that's one of the boldest ways to get our attention.
Absolutely. So let's say someone's listening and they're kind of in that space where they're starting to recognize, okay, I've got repeated chronic symptoms. Like, what would you help them in regards to a next step or the next thing that they can do to start their healing journey?
Right. So the first thing that I would recommend when you have chronic patterns is to tune into, well, there's two thoughts here. One is tuning into your physical body. And if this is a chronic emotional pattern or a cognitive pattern that's coming up, then you just identify, where in my body is this living? Like, where in my body is this housed? And then you allow yourself to really connect with that energy and have a conversation with it. You can even like pretend to remove it from your body, right? And have this conversation with this energetic entity and be like, what's going on, dude? Like, what are you doing here? Right? Like, what is the lesson that you are bringing forward for me? And just be open to receiving whatever comes forward into your consciousness when you ask that question, because starting to tune into our energy and what it is that we actually desire on a day-to-day basis is really important for starting to be able to receive messages from the universe. So it could be as simple as, when you wake up in the morning, practice for the first 20 minutes just doing what you feel like doing, not doing your standard routine or exactly what you think you're supposed to do. Just like, all right, do I feel like laying in bed longer? Do I feel like going down and getting a cup of tea? Do I feel like eating what for breakfast? And then just allow yourself to start listening to your cues, because once you start to do that on a consistent basis, the universe knows you're listening, and then you'll start seeing more and more signs.
I love that you're talking about listening to your body, because I feel like that's so underestimated and that we can get really stuck in a routine. And even with healing, I've noticed, and I
Yeah.
try to make sure I'm really clear with my clients. Like, if we've talked about meditating, or we've talked about movement, or we've talked about a particular healing modality, if you're forcing a healing modality, if you're forcing yourself to meditate, or you're so like resistant to the, to the workout you're doing that morning, you have to not do it. You have to
Yep.
listen in and say, okay, what would be better for me? What would feel better right now? Because I think even with healing, we start to get into a routine and a structure, and it has to, and we force it and we push it. And sometimes we do need to, kind of push ourselves or nudge ourselves in a general direction, or nudge ourselves to, get off the couch, and if we need to move our body. But sometimes our body says rest. Sometimes our
Yep.
body says, have the snack. Sometimes our body gives us more flexibility than our mind and our structured mind does. So when we start to listen to our body, we start to get into a space where we can heal according to our own soul.
I love that so much, because that's, I call our bodies the tuning fork for the universe.
Oh, I love it.
Because I
Yeah.
feel like, yeah, it's like, it's always vibrating because it's made of energy just like everything else. So it's always vibrating in accordance with, like, what's coming into our field. And so what are you exposing yourself to? And your body's always changing. So your body is going to dictate something different on a day-to-day basis. So allow it to be your tuning fork for the universe. Like, allow yourself to see, like, how is it vibrating today? Like, what's coming up for me? What seems exciting to me today, and what is going to assist me with recharging and taking care of myself today?
I love even what you said about just tuning into the energy and where it sits on your body. I think that's such an underestimated tool of just practicing noticing when you have energy that's not yours, practicing noticing when you have energy around your body that feels dense. Like, if you just bring your energy and you kind of scan through, where does it feel hot? Where does it feel heavy? Where does it feel thick? And you'll be able to, when you ask yourself those questions, have that awareness of, oh wow, I didn't even know I felt that around my shoulders or neck, right? I didn't even
Yep.
know I had that, my right hip, it feels like, a little something. And so from there, when you can identify that energy, like you were saying, pull that out, ask it a question, see what it has to say. But I love the thought and the idea of just tuning in more often for all of the things, and tuning into your body and
Mhm.
asking your body, because our body is not like our mind, in the sense that our mind can say, well, no, you really should. And it can guilt us and shame us and manipulate us. Our body does not lie.
Right.
it is consistently truthful to you if you pay attention to it.
Exactly. I love that so much. And it's about raising that awareness of ourselves, just like you were talking about earlier, and heightening that awareness of just what's in our field and what's presenting and getting curious about it, like not kicking yourself about it, not analyzing it to the nth degree, just getting curious about it and being like, oh, this is interesting, this sensation that's coming forward. What's that about? And one of the tools that I use, that I still use to this day, but used a ton at the beginning, was Louise Hay's You Can Heal Your Life book, because she has that index in the back for any, emotional or physical issue that could arise. Now, she doesn't have all of them, but she does have a lot back there. And what she identifies is, the limiting beliefs that are associated with these different patterns or discomforts or dysfunction that arise in our lives. And so then and I'm telling you, they're spot on every single
Yeah.
time for me, for clients, for other people. And so it's really a good resource for people who are starting out to be able to say, hey, you know what? I'm curious about this. So, all right, let me look up what does this signify, this area of my body? What limiting belief could be underlying this that I can shift my mindset and see things in a different way, is a really good tool to start with, just to start raising awareness.
You mentioned getting curious, and I love this so much because I think that, as we were talking about with mental health, there's so much judgment and so much shame and so much stigma attached to mental health concerns or anxiety or depression. And there's also so much meaning behind what it means for you for now, what it means for you for your future, what it means about for you and your social relationships. And I love the idea of just approaching the things that are arising with curiosity and non-judgment, rather than diving into, okay, well, what does this say about me, or why am I so jacked up, or whatever the case might be. Because when we release the judgment from the experience, we can hold compassion for it. And when we
Exactly.
have compassion, that's, I believe personally, is where healing can really, really connect deep within us, when we're not having those blocks of shame or those blocks of guilt or those blocks of burden or those blocks of and beliefs around brokenness. When we can just say, oh wow, like, you really went through that, and I'm so sorry, and I love you anyway.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's so beautiful. I also love that it opens up the opportunity to start really allowing and surrendering to the universe. Because if you get curious about something, like I say this all the time to people when I'm trying to help them, bring through information from the Akashic Records or just enhance their intuitive abilities, that like if I was playing with my dog in the front yard and then I'm in the Akashic Records and this message comes in or this image comes in about playing with my dog in the front yard. So I can easily dismiss that and just be like, no, 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 that's just my ego. I was just doing that with my dog in the front yard. But if you follow and you get curious about that image that comes up and you say, all right, let me just watch it as if it's a scene unfolding, and you just watch what happens, you'll realize that when it's a message from the universe, it's not going to take you down the exact same path of how things unfolded when you were actually playing with your dog in the front yard. It's going to take you down another path. And if you watch and be like, okay, what are they doing? And where are they going now? And how are they interacting? And what does it feel like? And, you start to get curious and allow like the story to unfold around it. And you let the universe paint that for you. That's really a huge step in beginning to trust that the universe is divine intelligence, knows a
Yes,
heck of a lot better than us humans, right? And
absolutely.
has a very potent message for us in whatever's coming forward.
I think that's such an excellent point too, because I know that from learning my own intuition, there are times where something would pop in my head, and I would feel like, oh, I just have like a level of ADD, or I
Right.
just keep getting distracted, or I just can't focus today. And I remember sitting with a woman, and I kept thinking about a argument I had with someone like 2 days before. And I was like, this is so inappropriate for me to be thinking about this while I'm trying to be present with this person. And I finally said to her, I'm like, did you by chance have a fight with somebody this morning that was close to you? And she was like, oh my God, it's all I can think about. I can't even focus on our session today because it's all I can think about is this fight I had. And it gave us
Mm,
permission to talk about that. But our intuition is speaking to us incessantly, in ways that we don't identify it as such. And so when we
Yep.
start to connect and tune into our body, we can also start to connect and tune into those messages by recognizing them, and by understanding. When you begin to feel into your own energy, you begin to know your energy well enough to know when something is coming to you rather than created by you.
Yes.
This is so good. This is so good. I love this conversation.
So fun. I could talk about this stuff all day.
I love the idea of developing your intuition. So how do we take somebody from that space of recognizing their own energy, scanning their own energy, hearing those messages, to introducing them to their Akashic records?
So yeah, so really, I actually have a free video on my YouTube channel to show people, to tell people what the Akashic records are, how you use them, how you open them, how you can start to bring through messages in that space, because I want as many people as possible to know how to do that and just start to play in that space, right? Like just open them and open them for a few minutes and see what happens. You may get nothing. You may feel nothing at first. Open them again like 3 days later, and just start to kind of ease into just opening your records and just having them open, because what you're doing is you're tuning your body to that frequency. You're tuning your energy field to this very high frequency space, which if you do nothing else in that space, you're heightening your vibration and you're healing just by being present there, right? So you don't even have to do anything at first. Just start to open them and see what comes. And you may find that things start pouring in and this is an easy peasy path for you. Or you may find that you're like, oh, I need more guidance here. Like I need to know more how to bring through messages or how to ask questions or whatever. And that's where, like for me, I joined Cara Melendi's group, her membership group. And at the beginning, and that helped me so much because I was able to go in consistently and really learn how to use that space. And I created a membership group of my own because it was so valuable to me. And so now I do that for other people too, to hold space and assist them with like getting comfortable with how to merge that, spiritual dimension with the human experience. Cause that could be the hard part for people. It's like, all right, well, I'm entering this space and now what do I do? And it's
Yeah.
like, all right, well, and so I love like being able to say, all right, this is how you bring through specific protocols or like specific guidance and direction from this space. And some people it just comes naturally, which is awesome. And some people need guidance on this journey. So that's where I would, when you get to that point where you're like, oh my gosh, this is stupid, it's not working, or I'm getting frustrated and you're, throwing up your hands, that's when you reach out and you say like, hey, I need some guidance and support in this area.
I want people to be able to find your YouTube, and I want you to, how can people reach you on YouTube, on Instagram? Because I want them to be able to have access to all of these tools and to be able to work with you before I ask that
Sure.
question and it gets lost.
Oh, sure. No problem. So, so you can access my YouTube. My channel is Emerge Healing and Wellness.
Awesome.
And it's the same handle on Instagram, just Emerge Healing and Wellness, and is spelled out. So that's where you can find me on Instagram. My website is theakashictherapist.com. You can also just type in my name, Laura Mazzotta, and that'll also get you to my website if it's easier.
Awesome. And I will have all the links in the bio to this podcast. So if you're like, what did she just say? Just go to the bio. All the links will be there to be able to book with her, to find this link on YouTube so you can walk through the Akashic Records yourself. And I love that you're offering space for people to connect with you, because I think that when you start to go down a spiritual path, there's the part of you that's open to it and ready for it, and there's part of you that questions everything that happens while you're experiencing it. So you're going to have the experience, you're going to feel a million times lighter, you're going to feel so good, and then you're going to be like, am I losing my absolute mind? Like there's always this process for people when they begin spirituality where it feels so right, it feels so good in the moment, and then if you have a second to logically process what the hell just happened or why you just cried through a meditation, you have that secondary guessing process of the part of you that isn't quite ready to embrace it entirely. So I love that you have the mentorship program, and I love that you have the YouTube videos, because you guys will absolutely want help with this and want somebody to be holding your hand while you walk through it, just to help validate for you that your intuition is on point. Your soul knows how to heal itself. Your soul knows how to share the information with you that maybe you don't have in present waking, normal, everyday life. So I'm so excited for people to be able to connect with you and work with you. If you had to give anybody a last tip or trick for them to step out of these repeated chronic symptoms, out of these repeated patterns into a better version of themselves, what would be maybe the last piece of advice you'd give?
I would say be really confident that the future is brighter than what you're currently in the midst of.
Mm,
Like that's the piece, right? It's not, and it's different from hope, right? Hope is there's still a shred of doubt, but really being able to know very confidently, yeah, I feel like I suck in this area, or this sucks right now, or whatever. But I also know very confidently that this is not what I'm destined for the rest of my life, right? Like just knowing really, really confidently, like continuing to return to that belief that yeah, this is where I am right now, but it's temporary. It's not permanent. And having that faith in yourself and in the guidance of the universe that you will move through it. You might not know exactly how yet, but just know confidently that this will not be your forever.
I love all of this. I think that's such a big, important piece to know as, somebody who's been in a darker space before of like, I wish I could say it over and over again to people like, everything is temporary. Every mood is temporary. Every piece of
Yep.
energy is temporary. We can move it, we can flow it. And the more we can start to identify and connect with better energy, like you were saying, practice with the Akashic Records, practice going through the meditation, even if it doesn't make sense, even if you don't get anything, even if you're like, that was a waste of time, try it one more time, try it maybe a
Yep.
third time. Like, just keep trying to plug into that energy because eventually it will click. Eventually you'll find a modality for you, but this conversation has been so beautiful, and I've just adored and loved. I knew this was the right divine timing, and I'm so grateful that we were able to connect to share all of this beautiful information with the people listening, Laura. So I'm so grateful you were able to jump on today.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me. This was such a blessing.
And make sure to connect with Laura. Make sure to book a session. Check out her YouTube and her Instagram. Like I said, I'll put it in the bio so everybody can have access to it.
Awesome.